Hold on, I just got to sneeze before we.
Yeah, go ahead, mate. Be my guest.
Oh, I think it's kind of stuck in my sinus as well.
Hmm. Hello and welcome to the Auto NBA podcast. My name's Sean, and joining me as always is the one and only Dante Block, Mr. Block, my man. How are we?
Sean, I'm disappointed that we're going back to the bad old days of Zoom podcast recording.
Yeah, back to our roots, even though they're not actually our roots. It's just do you reckon over half the pod has been done on Zoom?
Yeah, I reckon.
Oh
I
man.
reckon.
Yeah, I thought I'd miss it a little bit. I thought I'd miss the great times to be able to sneeze and cough and burp and do all that and just chuck myself on mute. But in the time since we've been recording in person, I've only ever like sneezed once in like 10 episodes. So yeah, it's actually you're right, the bad old times.
The
What a
bad
great
old
start to a
times.
pod.
I feel like our real roots is the Latrobe University recording studio.
Mm,
That's where it all kicked
mm.
off. Someone asked me the other day, how long you been doing this? And I said, oh, we started in April 2019. And then the realization hit me that we're 3 months off our third birthday, which is pretty
Holy
insane.
crap. Dude, I remember for a second birthday, I made those cookies. Remember the shortbread, and then the icing sugar just went. No, the icing went everywhere. But since then, I've learned a new recipe for making icing, and that's with egg white. Did you know there's egg white in icing?
I'm not an icing aficionado, but I can
Mm,
believe there's egg white
yeah,
in
I
icing.
I was like, that's disgusting, but it just yeah, it just hardens up.
Yeah, I just feel like you put enough sugar in, it won't really matter. So
Yeah, exactly, mate. Yeah, shit, 3 years. That's wild. We should celebrate by doing something, but we'll talk about that later because there is a league breaking trade on our hands here. This is going to shift the power dynamics of the whole entire league. I'll run through the particulars and then I'll let you take the first points. But the Denver Nuggets have acquired Bryn Forbes in a three-team trade coming from Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. Denver sent out a 2028 second-round pick to the Spurs. And they sent Bol and PJ Dozier to the Celtics, while the Spurs received Juancho Hernan-Gomez from Boston. And what's the first thing that you think of, Dante, when you hear about this trade and when you saw the details of this trade?
the first thing that I think of is poor Facundo Campazzo. His role is just being siphoned away from him. Um, this isn't a particularly sexy trade, and I think Forbes is probably the only player who matters in this trade,
Mm,
in that he's likely to be playing in the rotation for a playoff basketball team.
mm,
For the Spurs and the Celtics, it's literally just roster and cap management.
mm,
So I think that, Boston gets Bol. All right, cool. I had heard through the grapevine that Wancho may be getting waived by the Spurs.
mm,
So that leaves Forbes as the only notable player from this trade. So assuming that they're acquiring him to play like a bit of a Patty Mills light kind of role,
mm.
someone who can actually hit a three. So looking at you, Austin Rivers. Um, it's hard to get too excited about this, but you assume that he'll be in the playoff rotation when push comes to shove for Denver.
Yeah. Like honestly, obviously I write for nuglove.com and I've been looking at this trade and there was obviously a rumor that they were interested in Bryn Forbes. And I actually wrote an article when the rumor came out and said Bryn Forbes isn't the answer because yes, Denver needs shooting in a bad way. But really at the end of the day, like this season does matter. And obviously every single game, you want to try and win every single game. And Tim Connolly has come out and said, look, I'm going to make a trade. I'm going to make a move to try and help the Nuggets this season. We're not just rolling over and rolling over the die into the next game, into the next season when everyone's at full strength. So it's like awesome. You're going to do something to help this season. But I was really hoping that whatever the Nuggets do at this trade deadline, it's something that can help them next season as well. So, like when I mentioned to you last week, if you trade for a Terrence Ross, you'll have that guy he's got 2 years remaining on his contract. You'll have him this year to help put something around Jokic this year, but he'll also be hopefully in the closing lineup next year when everyone's at full strength, right? But Bryn Forbes has just signed a 1 year deal with the San Antonio Spurs. So at the end of the year, he's a free agent. And best case scenario, he looks like JJ Redick or something, or Paddy Mills, as you said. Best case scenario, he looks really good. He makes even more threes next to Jokic and just looks like an incredible player and way better than anyone thought. But if that does happen, then all of a sudden you've got a guy who was on a minimum who is going to want a little bit more because he looks better than he did while he's playing with the Spurs. And then you turn around and you don't have enough cap space to re-sign him, or you don't want to pay that guy. You want to put that money elsewhere. So it's like, best case scenario, he might just go by the time you're ready to compete for a title. And worst case scenario, he's just a slight upgrade over Austin Rivers. But Dante, I've seen you shoot. You might even be a slight upgrade over Austin Rivers. And this is just another guy in the way of Bones Highland's development, because he's looking pretty good and he's looking pretty legit. And if he can spend this time developing, as we've talked about with some teams who are taking a little bit of a gap year, like the Clippers this season, just see if he's like a little bit better and maybe play him 20 minutes a game instead of 10 minutes a game. And then next year he's just got, double the development under his belt when you're ready to like put an actual championship contending roster around Jokic.
I think though, in terms of the best case, worst case scenario outcomes, that the far more likely outcome is that he just plays like Bryn Forbes, and it's like the middle case outcome, and that he plays like someone who can hit threes when you need him to, can do a little bit of ball handling, and basically just space the floor around Jokic. That's more likely than him popping off or him being terrible. And if that happens, his market for next year will probably be pretty similar to the market for this year. So you mentioned that he's on a minimum. So if you have to pay him $6 million next year to re-sign him, that's just what you got to pay for a shooter. I don't think there's any. I don't think the risk of this blowing out and Denver having to shovel up $12 million, like you're not going to give him the Landry Shamet contract, $11 million, 4 for 44. I think far more likely is that you just sign him to a pretty reasonable contract next offseason. And if he does play a significant role, he's going to want to come back to Denver because, there's
that's where he had his success
of actually being played. With regards to Bones, like if Bones is good enough, then surely he'll be able to carve out a role alongside or ahead of Bryn Forbes. I get the angle of like just play him, just let him go, but it's Bryn Forbes. Like he's not like a world beater. He has a very particular skill set that is valuable, but Bones profiles as a bit more of a versatile player. He can handle the ball a lot more. He can get into the lane. He's a better defender. So there's a lot more avenues for him to kind of force his way in, even with Bryn Forbes complicating the backcourt picture. I think the only person whose role is going to be completely cut is going to be Austin Rivers. So, I mentioned jokingly Facu before. I mentioned Facu before, but Facu and Bones will still be playing. Alongside, ahead of, behind, whatever, they'll still be playing. So I don't think it's going to be like a situation where Bones just gets glued to the bench and he watches Bryn Forbes come in and be Bryn Forbesy.
Yeah, and if Michael Murn chooses to play a Bryn Forbes over Bones, then it's like we've got bigger issues than Bones getting minutes. You might have a coach issue. But from the other side of the Denver Nuggets for here, obviously sending out Bol and sending out PJ Dozier. Like Bol, it was a little bit awkward because he'd already been traded, and then he failed his physical, and then he's just gone under the knife for foot surgery. He's going to be out for 8 to 12 weeks, which you're assuming is the rest of the season. He's on an expiring deal, and it was actually funny. After he got traded, the Nuggets signed James Ennis III to a 10-day hardship contract, and they actually gave his number 10 to James Ennis before Bol had actually like officially gone to Detroit. So you knew like he wasn't going to stay long. It's like the relationship's been frayed. He knows that they want him gone, and now he's just been dumped. But PJ Dozier, it's really unfortunate that he tore his ACL because like he was going to be the starting wing for this team, and Devon Reed's come in and he's doing a little bit of what PJ Dozier does. But look, you can't really risk bringing back a guy who was already kind of a project and very situational. You can't really risk bringing him back, using up a roster spot, and a guy who has just torn his ACL for next year when you're trying to compete. So that's a bit of a bummer. And look, I don't see the Celtics keeping either of those two dudes. But First piece of in-season business from President of Basketball Operations, Brad Stevens, as he gets off Juancho Hernan Gomez for absolutely nothing. It doesn't cost him anything to ditch his $7 million in salary. And now the Celtics are just less than $2 million over the tax. And if they just make one more tiny move, they'll dip under that beautiful tax line. So I guess it's a pass grade, but also a positive pass grade for Brad Stevens. What do you think?
I think dangerous time to be the 11th man on the Boston Celtics. You've got to be looking around being like, fuck, am I next?
You're 100% next. But yeah, this Boston team's a little bit sad. So there's no reason to fucking pay the tax for what you're seeing at the moment.
No, and I think as well, it's a similar thing with Denver, where Denver wants to avoid paying the tax, for this year as well, but also so that if you are better next year, you're not getting hit with repeater taxes, because the more consecutive years you spend in the tax, the higher the tax is, which means that for both Boston and Denver, teams that I think are going to be hoping to have their best years in 2023 and beyond. If you go in the tax this year for something that's not going to potentially result in a championship, you're just going to increase that to not tenfold, but multiple fold down the line. So this is what everyone loves. This is why NBA fans love trade season, because we get to talk about maths.
Yeah. I think we've exhausted all content in this trade. Do you want to move on to some of the other rumors? And actually, before we get into the trade rumors, do you want to talk about the Frank Vogel stuff?
Yeah, this is a bit wild and sad, but reports coming out from and Bill Oram of The Athletic that Frank Vogel's job is in serious jeopardy, and that he'd be assessed on a game-by-game basis. WTF? What the hell is that? Obviously, the Lakers are not very good, grossly underachieving. But I feel like every sensible person in the NBA universe can look at this and say that the reason that they're grossly underachieving, they're sitting at 22 and 22 right now, is not because of Vogel, championship-winning head coach Frank Vogel, but because of their roster construction. What say you?
Yeah, he's clearly a scapegoat, and I think there's a little bit of backpedaling by the Lakers here. Now, this initial report came out from Bill Oram and Sam Amick of The Athletic, but then just 12 to 24 hours later, we had a report from Dan Wojcicki and Broderick Turner of the LA Times. So that quote, "There are no current plans," unquote, to fire Frank Vogel. But like, he sort of overachieved in the bubble and had this team defending at a much higher level, and he was fully healthy. But then this season he's come in, he's been missing Anthony Davis for 6 weeks now. Russell Westbrook isn't a perfect fit with nearly anyone, let alone LeBron James, who the two are very similar players. One just happens to be much taller and much better at basketball.
I was going to say, don't forget the better.
One's much better. But like, what's a day to day? Like, is it like, does he win a game and go, all right, I've got my job for 2 more days, and then he'll go to another stadium and lose, and it's just like, oh, hang on, am I going to come home? There's going to be like, some mobster in my backyard, just like, you're done. You're getting whacked.
Yeah, if they're down by 13 going into the fourth, and then they win by 1, it's like, oh damn, well, if they had a loss, we would have to fire him, but they didn't. So
yeah, and it's like, if you're starting to think about firing the coach, just like a GM, like if you're starting to think about firing someone, it's probably a good time to fire them. The Lakers today are playing the Pacers. Then 2 days from now, they play the Magic, and then they've got the Heat, Nets, 76ers, Hornets, and Hawks. So I reckon they're probably going to lose a couple of those games, maybe even all of them if we're lucky, and we might be seeing the end of Frank Vogel sooner rather than later. Not that I think he really deserves it. And what's the alternative here? Like, David Fizdale is the assistant coach that I think he's a clutch guy, or at least he's a LeBron guy. So like, is David Fizdale going to come in and take all the data and do all that? And like, is he going to be like the heir apparent that's going to come save this team? And all of a sudden, Russell Westbrook's going to start shooting. I mean, like, he always does turn it on the second half of the season. So maybe if you fire Frank Vogel just before the second half, which I think we're at right now, then all of a sudden Russell Westbrook will have his second half surge, and then it'll look much better. But there's no like, it's not like there's heaps of coaching candidates out there to replace him. So like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one caveat would be that the last time a LeBron team fired their coach in season and replaced him with the assistant coach, they won the NBA championship.
Mm.
Uh, that was a different time, a different era of basketball in general, but also in LeBron's career. Um, I think the move to the move to fire Vogel would inevitably lead to a bit more of a LeBron centric approach, even more so than there obviously already is, which is
Mm.
dangerous on a coaching side and a personnel side, because LeBron, in his vast accumulation of power over the last 10 years, has proven to be wrong about personnel and coaching decisions kind of like pretty regularly. So, fully leaning into this idea of like, let's implement a less accomplished coach, so that LeBron is happy, after LeBron was the one that was like, yeah, let's bring in Westbrook, let's do all this stuff, let's trade all of our guys. I was thinking about it at work the other day. Literally every player that the Lakers have traded away in the last 5 years has turned out to actually be a really good player. So LeBron's been there for 4 years and they've traded away so many good players that have turned out to be, like genuinely excellent NBA starters or above.
Mm.
So I just feel like, obviously Vogel is a scapegoat here. Something needs to change, but something's going to change, and David Fizdale is going to come in and be like, yeah, damn, Anthony Davis is still out. Russell Westbrook sucks. LeBron's getting older, and I've got to play DeAndre Jordan and Dwight Howard as my fives.
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's a problem for anyone.
And also the somewhere in the LA Times report, they were talking about the decision makers, and there was Kurt Rambis's name there. And I'm like, what the fuck is he doing there? Like, have we not learned? Like, I know he wears goggles and he was a legend, and only one of those things is true. What the fuck are we doing here? Like, why are we listening to it? And there was a quote that said that's Kurt Rambis wanted to play Dwight Howard and DeAndre Jordan together. And it's like, dude, you can barely play fucking Dwight by himself. Like, Dwight's a good backup, and you want to play him with the dude who's a terrible fit with him. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, and obviously the Lakers have a bit of a history of doing this, because for years and years it was Mitch Kupchak, who was in charge, who was just like, a Lakers sycophant. And yes, he put together some absolutely outstanding Lakers teams led by Kobe and Powell. But towards the end of his time in LA, it was just like gross incompetence on a managerial level. And it was obvious that he was only kind of being kept around because of his close ties to the Lakers organization and the Bus family. And Rambis is the exact same thing. Obviously, a Lakers player, a Lakers legend from way back when, just hanging around, cruising by obviously on the strength of his name and association rather than his advice, because the one insight that we've had from him is the worst possible insight that anybody could have given. And the exact opposite insight that any intelligent NBA commentator over the last like 6 to 12 months has given. He's the only person saying we actually need to go back to playing the 47th and 48th best centers in the league together. That's essentially what he said. Get this fucking clown out of here.
All right, let's move on to biggest piece of rumor. Now, do you like my title here? I've said that trade season is on the bain-marie, because trade season is not blistering hot, but it's warm enough to keep your food warm and food safe for 6 hours. So the first bit of news we have here is the quote grand prize of this year's trade deadline, coming from Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report.
Fisher, he's on an absolute mission, this bloke.
He's on a mission, but a lot of his missions involve Jerami Grant. But anyway, Jerami Grant, that's the grand prize. Now it says that's the he said that the Pistons are looking for 2 firsts or a first and a young player in a package for Jerami Grant. Now I've referred to this as the Aaron Gordon package. Now Aaron Gordon was obviously traded for 2 first-round picks and RJ Hampton, I believe. I'm not even going to double check that, but part of that payment was also asking Orlando to take on the Gary Harris contract, which is now looking fine now that he's healthy again. But that's sort of deal is what we're going to see for Jerami Grant, and the team's interested according to this Fisher report, are the Lakers, the Trailblazers, the Knicks, the Jazz, the Wizards, the Celtics, the Pacers, the Wolves, and the Kings. They are a lot of names. But one massive asterisk that I found in this article is that Jerami wants to be, quote, a primary offensive option, unquote, on his new team. So, like, you got to give it to him. Like, he went to Detroit so he can make $20 million and take 20 million shots. And he's like, hey, I'm not winning games here, but I would still like to go somewhere and make $20 million and take 20 million shots. And one little piece of power that Jerami wields here is that he can obviously decide to extend with this new team as soon as he goes there, as soon as he gets to the offseason. So if he gets traded to a team where he's playing a similar role to in Denver, where he's, the third or fourth guy on a Western Conference finalist, which was a good role for him. And then he goes, oh, look, no, there's heaps of fun. We just made a finals run, but I sort of want to take a lot of shots. I'm not going to extend, and then just exercise his right in free agency to leave. I don't know whether he means the primary offensive option or a primary offensive option, but this sort of puts a damper on my expectations for this trade, because I think that will rightfully scare away a lot of teams that might just be looking to add him as a smaller cog in a bigger system.
Yeah, and I think the bloom is definitely off the rose of the first half of last season, when everyone was like, whoa, Jerami Grant can actually do this. He's still averaging 20 a game, but his efficiency is absolutely horrendous. And part of that is, playing on a terrible Detroit team where he has to be that kind of like primary offensive option, but the anchor of the offense. Like, someone has to take the shots, and he's the only person that has, both the build and the mentality to take the shots, but also the credibility to be taking those shots. As a well-respected veteran on the team. But he's got to know that wherever he's going, whoever's trading for him isn't trading for him to be the Detroit Grant. They're trading for him to be an absolutely hyped up, souped up version of the Denver Grant, because instead of being a marginalized offensive role player, he's shown that he can do stuff off the dribble. He can shoulder a bit more of an offensive burden, which makes him a much more valuable player than when he was just at Denver. But he's got to know that wherever he's going, he's going to be at best a third option, which is what he should be. I mean, some of the names that appeal to me, fitting him in on the list, would be somewhere like Utah. I like him in Minnesota. I like him in Boston. So those are places where there's already at least two primary ball handlers or offensive creators. So, he knows he's not an idiot, I assume. But yeah, he has not kind of held up his end of the bargain that he kind of showed that he was capable of last season. Because for the first half of the season, we were like, whoa, he's shooting 48%. He's averaging 23 points. Is he going to be an all-star? And, fast forward to now, he's shooting a tick above 40. He's shooting 33% from three. Not good. Not good.
Yeah. Well, out of all those names, I think there's 10 names there. Which one's your favorite?
My absolute favorite is Utah, because I think that he is the sort of player that they currently don't have, with soft, doughy white boys, Joe Ingles and Bojan Bogdanovic on the wing. He'd give them something that they don't have defensively, because as great a defender as Jingles was in his past, he's a little bit over the hill. And Bogdanovic has always kind of been okay defensively, but that's just because he's large, not because he's good. So I feel like a Grant on defense in there would be really cool, but also like Grant around, having proven that he can do a little bit off the dribble, Grant around like a Spider and Gobert pick and roll. Like I don't mind that. And I also like him in mini as well for much the same reasons as I said previously. But getting him there is probably a little bit more difficult, just because they've got their assets are kind of set in a way where there's like Cat, D'Lo, and
I can see a Timberwolves trade going through much more than a Jazz trade, because with Jazz it's like, you want 2 picks or a pick and a young player. So like their picks going to Memphis this year The Jazz own their 2023 pick fully and 2025. But do you really want to move those two picks? With 2025, it's like, okay, what the hell's happening in Utah then? They should still be good, but like that's pretty far out for a guy who's not your number one option. And then in the way of young players, Eric Paschall, Jared Butler.
But the thing with Minnesota is they've got their big three guys, and then the rest of their players kind of not that good. Even their young players. The young players you'd be looking at would be like Jared Vanderbilt, Jaden McDaniels, both of whom have shown like a little bit, but not enough that they'd want to be like the anchor in this trade. And then you're looking at like kind of crappy veterans on bigger contracts to make the money work. So you'd be taking back Patrick Beverley, Taurean Prince. That's the sort of players that we're talking about. And are Minnesota going to throw in a good pick in here after the absolute debacle that they've experienced the last few years, throwing good picks into average trades? Yeah. I probably think that if you're going to get a Minnesota pick, it would be heavily protected. And that reduces, I don't know, the appeal. I really like him in Utah. I think that he would be really good because he has to go somewhere where he's going to actually be used. Like, he's the belle of the ball. He should go somewhere. He should go to a team that can, push into like the conference finals discussion by adding him, not a team that's like, we'll make the 6th seed and then we'll pay him $50 million when we have to in unrestricted free agency.
Yeah. I just don't see it happening unless they want to like reroute Ingles or Boyan to a third team. But then is that third team really going to give up a first round pick just to get one of them when they're both on the wrong side of 30? I don't know. I agree with you. I'd love to see it happen, but just struggling to.
Yeah, it does get complicated.
Well, what a finisher. Let's move on to the next piece of news. This comes from Pacers PR that Myles Turner is out for at least 2 weeks with a stress fracture in his foot. I think that's a re-evaluation in 2 weeks, but the initial reaction was, well, I really hope this doesn't damper his trade market, because this might be the last time they can trade him and actually get some real tangible assets in return. Then there was a report from Michael Scott of Hoops Hype saying that the Pacers are looking for 2 firsts for Turner. Let's refer back to that Aaron Gordon package. Maybe it's a first and a young player or 2 firsts. And then after that injury, Mark Stein reported that the Dallas Mavericks have rescinded their interest in Myles Turner, but said it had nothing to do with the stress fracture in his foot. The report just happened to come a day afterwards, and then they pointed towards their defense improving to 5th in the past fortnight and said, look, we actually don't need a defensive center. We've gotten better on our own. We're not worried about this injury whatsoever. But I don't know. I really hope he gets traded, because as I've been saying for what seems like 2 years now, I really want to see Myles Turner in a new situation where he's getting used properly and he doesn't have to make up for his front court partner's, shortcomings. But yeah, it's looking a tiny bit less likely. Do you reckon this will scare away people?
Yeah, I think it absolutely will, because 7-footers undergoing, foot issues generally doesn't resolve in 2 weeks. So it's not a stretch at all to think that this evaluation in 2 weeks' time is going to lead to another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, and we're not that far away from the trade deadline. We're 3 weeks away. So any team that's trading for him is probably not trading for him with like the full knowledge that he's going to be on the court by March or even April. Which, I mean, yes, he is a sort of player that fits in really well in a lot of places. He's a sort of player that can anchor a defense. We've talked about this, in episodes past. He should have real trade value and lots of interest. But if you're going to trade what the Pacers are looking for, this Gordon package, it's not like a tremendous amount of assets, but it's still tangible stuff. You can't really trade it for someone that you don't even know is going to be on the court for you. So I think that this probably will have a real impact on his trade market.
All right, and let's wrap up with a little bit of Knicks news, because I know you and I love the Knicks, especially when it comes from Mark Berman of the New York Post. One One of them is a quote from Cam Reddish saying that he feels like he can be a star in New York. But just before we don't even have to fucking acknowledge that. But we haven't talked about the Reddish trade because it happened literally hours after we hit stop on our last podcast, and some of us might have talked about Cam Reddish in that episode and maybe looked a little bit wrong, but that's all right. But what are your thoughts on the deal here that sent Reddish and Solomon Hill, who's out for the whole entire season, for Kevin Knox and a top 18 protected first round pick from Charlotte to the Atlanta Hawks? What went through your head when you saw that deal?
Well, first of all, it brought a smile to my face because it's two foundational members of the what number does his field goal percentage start with Hall of Fame that have been traded for each other, which is something that doesn't happen every day. My first thought was that Cam Reddish isn't very good, and the Knicks already have wings that aren't particularly good. So I don't know. I'm not getting excited about this. The advanced numbers on Cam Reddish are still terrible. Credit where credit is due. He's shooting 38% from three, not from the field, but from three this season.
Yeah, he's gotten slightly better from the field, and he's roughly doing the exact same thing he was last year.
Yeah, he's gotten slightly better, improving from high 30s to 40% from the field.
I don't know why he gets to keep the gleam of like, oh, look at this lottery pick. He could be very, very, very good. But like anyone else who puts through 3 years of what he's done right now, just
3 years of shooting less than 40% from the field.
Yeah, like for some reason he always shakes it. Yeah, is it because he played for Duke?
He's genuinely like a pretty reasonable defender, and he's got the big frame. But it is a bit baffling because it's not like he can't really do anything else offensively as well. It's not like he's been very successful as a ball handler. In fact, I'd say, again, he's quite diabolical whenever he tries to do anything with the ball in his hands, which is why he's shooting, half of his shots this season are coming from three. So he's going less and less into the paint, partially because of the role he's being asked to play, but partially because he fucking sucks when he tries to do it. So I don't know why he's kept that shine of being this, this like tantalizing prospect, because realistically he was underwhelming when he was in college. So the last time he actually like delivered on this incredible promise was his last year of high school. Anyway, I don't know. He obviously was the odd man out. He wasn't going to get paid in advance when push came to shove. So it's good for him to get onto a different team and try and carve out a role and see if he can unlock some of those elements of his game elsewhere.
But sort of addition by subtraction for the Hawks. Yeah, just sort of give him more minutes elsewhere.
Yeah, you're giving his minutes to Herder and Hunter when he comes back. The two guys that Herder's already been paid, Hunter is going to get paid. So it is a bit of addition by subtraction, and it also just makes the managing the cap sheet easier. Now I have to say it. I have to say it. Is there a chance that Kevin Knox stays and plays in Atlanta, or is he just literally just thrown in there to get him the fuck out of New York, where they're just done with him?
Well, he hasn't played for the Hawks yet. He's a free agent at the end of the year, and he should have quite a big cap hold given he was the ninth pick. I don't think he does. As you said, he's an honorary member of what number does his field goal percentage start with? And I'm just looking at his numbers now. They're quite bad. He's down across the board from last year and in some parts from the year before. I don't think I'm just shocked that Cam Reddish's trade value was this low. Like I thought someone was going to throw the 28th pick in the draft at him, and like I guess they did get the 18th pick or the 19th pick from Charlotte. But if Charlotte doesn't turn around, if Charlotte just has an injury trouble, then that 18th pick turns into 2 seconds because they're just in the lottery. So it's like. No, it didn't take a lot to get Cam Reddish. And I would have liked to see some other teams other than New York, because he's just going to be buried in Tibbs' rotation. I would like to see some other teams just come out there and take a little bit more of a flyer if this is all it's going to take. But
yeah, because essentially, if Charlotte makes the playoffs, then or the play-in, then that pick will convey.
Yeah,
and if they don't, then effectively there's no value. Like effectively, it was literally just a salary dump. So
from the
that's a
10th
pretty
pick, 3 years later, it's a salary dump. I mean, it happens all the time, but still, you know, given how much he's talked about and given the fact he was part of the value for fucking Luka Doncic.
Yeah, well, that one, yeah, you kind of, I mean, that was settled years ago, but the fact that, you know, he didn't stick is another tick in the Mavs favor for that trade. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where else would you have gone? What's the market like? Because you're not giving up 2 firsts, and you're not giving up a first and a young player for him. So what are you doing? Like a shitty first and like a rotation level player rather than like salary dump?
Well, if this is all it took, would you have rather Denver's first and Austin Rivers?
Probably not.
Well, so that's a guaranteed 20 to 24th pick. And then Austin Rivers, obviously, like Kevin Knox, who's just gone a year from now.
Yeah, but then, you know, they obviously feel good about Charlotte making the playoffs. Because if Charlotte makes the playoffs and they're the 8th seed, then that pick is going to be what, like?
No, it's not. Because if the pick is 16, then Charlotte keeps it.
Okay, true. All right. So if Charlotte's like the 9 seed, then it conveys. So I guess you're playing the odds there that they're going to get close enough, but not so close that the pick doesn't convey, and you're going to get the 18th or 19th pick in the draft instead of the 24th from the Nuggets. Which is that's pretty risky considering that the next year it's not like it goes down to like 14, 10 and then conveys to 2 seconds. It's just done. Straight up 2 seconds. Yeah. So I guess it's kind of like, you know, taking on the risk there. But I don't know. I feel like a late first is probably all you're going to get, because he really hasn't shown much.
Yeah.
He's shown that he can be a good wing defender, and this season he's shown that he can shoot some threes. I'm, you know, still a bit skeptical as to how real that is, considering what we've previously seen from him. But there's big wing defenders who can hit a 3 in the G League everywhere. You know, you can get that player as a 2nd round pick. You can get that player through summer league. Like, you don't need to be giving up real assets if that's all that he's going to be. So obviously the Knicks hope that he can unlock some of the stuff that he once appeared to have. But if you were just assessing him on his NBA career thus far, I mean, he hasn't really done anything whatsoever to distinguish himself. So the idea of giving up anything that would be close to a real asset makes me a bit queasy. So
yeah, fair enough. All right, well, that is all on the trade deadline bain-marie for today. Next time we talk, hopefully something bigger has happened.
Don't say that about the Bryn Forbes trade.
I'm just going. When's the trade deadline?
I think it's 3 weeks from this week.
Thursday, the 10th of February. All right, so we got a couple more pods. We could probably, you know, cool it a little bit on the trade talk for a couple.
Well, that's a Friday. That'll be a Friday here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a pod right before. That's
no. Well,
amazing.
why don't we do the pod on the Friday instead?
Okay. Well, this seems like after pod talk.
We'll just bring the listeners behind the curtain. This is the process.
BTS. Who's your favorite BTS member?
That's a question for Rachel Dupre, not me.
Mine's Jungkook.
All right, I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, nice. Dante's a Jimin fan. Well, thanks for listening. Remember to follow us on all the socials and everything. And by the time you hear this podcast, by the time this is in your ear holes, or just a little bit afterwards, I will be on the Download NBA podcast to talk about all things Warriors. So if you really want to hear an obnoxious Warriors fan just go on about Curry's legacy and how great the Lakers are, I will be there. And also they do a really good pod, so you should also check them out even without me.
As if this podcast wasn't enough Warriors fandom, you can go and get more obnoxious Warriors fandom.
To be fair, I didn't mention the W word at all today.
Yeah, no, you didn't. That's truly impressive. But we did lead the pod off with your true favorite team, acquiring a role player in a trade. So you could say that you substituted the W word for the Denver Nuggets. So anyway, that's neither here nor there.
All right. I'm just going to let that simmer. Dante, I'll speak to you next week. If you look for PointsBet's stock exchange listing, you'll find a bucket of jargon and doublespeak as they're considered a, quote, wagering services operator, unquote. That's a corporate stretch for the colloquial friendly brogan or, hey, look, it's Chris Bosh kind of image they're sending off with their targeted advertising. I don't know about you, but take me back to the days when former pro sports players signed brand deals with hair loss clinics or Fujitsu aircons, not, quote, wagering service providers.
If you're scrolling through your Facebook feed and you come across the two of our faces morphed into one, would that make you listen to our podcast more? I mean, if it does, let us know and we'll start doing it. But when I see a few NBA players' faces morphed into one, it doesn't make me want to pull out my wallet and donate some money to my local wagering services provider.
The worst part is we're coming to accept it. Wagering service provider ads are so ingrained in our sports and the way sports is delivered to us, it's almost impossible to avoid. 3/4 of Australian children aged between 8 and 16 years who watch sport think that betting on sport is normal and can name one or more sport betting companies. When I was in school, I was struggling to remember Pokemon names, and I'd be furious if I knew that brain power was being used to put towards wagering service providers and not them.
The wagering service providers know exactly who to target. It's not okay to let them ingrain themselves in young Australians' minds. It's not okay to target people in the middle of a pandemic, and it's not okay for gambling companies to wield so much influence in the world of sports. To help kick gambling out of sport, use your voice and sign the petition at www.endgamblingads.org.au/petition.